Hi everyone, my name is Shemal Darwish and I'm the Content Marketing Manager at Convirza. Welcome to today's webinar and thanks for taking the time out of your schedule to join us. During this webinar, we're going to discuss Google's decision to remove sidebar ads and what we need to consider moving forward. And we couldn't have a better expert than Frederick Vallaeys to guide us through this new advertising terrain. We might have some first-timers with us, so let me briefly explain who Convirza is, what we do, why we do these webinars, and then some housekeeping items before we turn the time over to Fred. First of all, Convirza is a call tracking and marketing analytics provider. So we essentially do three things and we do them through phone calls. The first thing is we provide basic call tracking data. That's so marketers can track the ads, campaigns, keywords, and channels that produce phone calls. The second thing we do is provide deep conversation analysis. So we analyze phone calls with speech recognition technology to determine what happened on the call. And then the third thing we do is marketing automation. So we can actually automate marketing actions based on the words and phrases said on the call. This is some pretty advanced technology, and it basically boils down to call marketing optimization. And a lot of marketers use us to optimize and streamline their campaigns, especially when it comes to mobile. The reason we host these webinars like this is because it gives us the opportunity to partner with some really great companies and people. So we'll regularly have marketing experts from all walks of the marketing world join us to present on topics in their area of expertise. In terms of housekeeping items, yes, the webinar is going to be recorded, so watch for that in your inbox. We'll also send a follow-up email that will have the recording, and it will also be hosted on our site. So if you go to convirza.com/resources, you can see the resources tab here and just scroll down to webinars, and you can check it out over there. Then the other thing to mention is that we do encourage you to ask questions. That's really important. So Fred is going to give a presentation that's in the neighborhood of 25 to 35 minutes long. Then we're going to take questions for about 5 to 10 minutes. So please type those questions into the little question bar, and then we'll address those. At the end of the presentation, I'll read those verbally to Fred. So in order to practice this, why don't you go to the question bar on the screen right now on your GoToWebinar screen and simply type in where you're calling in from today. Just start by typing in where you're located. That will give you a sense as to where we are, where everybody is, and let me get to know you a little better. Okay, here we go. Looks like we have Scott from Wisconsin, Neil from New York City, Seattle, Chicago, Scotland, Dallas, Texas, Post Falls, Idaho, Ian from Colorado, Boston, Huntington Beach, California, San Diego, Salt Lake City, that's where I am, and the Woodlands, Texas. Looks like we're all over the map today. That's terrific. And Fred is joining us from the lovely Bay Area. Great. Well, thanks everyone for doing that, and please type those questions into Fred. Now, to introduce Fred Vallaeys, he's done several webinars with us. He's truly an expert in the AdWords space. He was one of the first employees at Google and really helped them develop AdWords and the AdWords quality score specifically. He knows his stuff. He's now the founder and CEO of Optimizer, and they do a phenomenal job. So please check his tool out. It's fantastic. So with that, Fred, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to make you presenter now, so go ahead whenever you're ready.
Great, and thank you for having me on the call again, Shema, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So I'm going to go into presentation mode. If anyone has a hard time seeing the slides or you have a hard time hearing me, use that chat box and let us know, and we'll try to fix that. And then if any questions come up, like Shema said, just put those into the search box or into the chat box, and I'll make sure to answer any of those. But I've done several webinars with Convirza in the past, and on multiple occasions I've talked about quality score. So today's presentation is, again, going to touch on quality score, but I'm going to put it in the context of a pretty dramatic change that happened with Google. So as you've all noticed, back in February, all of a sudden, Google decided to remove the sidebar ads. The sidebar ads, also known as the ads on the right-hand side. So that came kind of as a shock. Some people call it Sidebar-geddon because it seems like such a dramatic change. So I wanted to address my perspective on that change, what I think it really means for the industry. And if you happen to be one of the advertisers affected by it, what can you do to respond to make sure that you still stay on that first page of ad results? So my name is Frederick Vallaeys. Shema already said I was an early Googler. I was Google's evangelist, so there you see me on stage at one of their events. I got the pleasure of going all across the United States, all across the world, and really telling people about how to do AdWords. But nowadays I run a company called Optimizer. And the reason I started that company actually was that after I left Google, I started managing a couple of AdWords accounts. And even though I was one of the people who created tools like the AdWords editor, which are supposed to make it much easier for people to manage their AdWords accounts, I still found it was really time consuming. And some of the basic tasks that we were doing on a day-to-day basis, like ad text optimization, keyword optimization, were just taking too much time because the interface for AdWords was built for 1 million advertisers. And here we are as specialists who do this day in, day out, and we don't really want to have the same tools that the layperson has, right? So we've tried to build something a little bit more advanced so that it'd be quicker for people to use. So, and I see a little notification there on my GoToMeeting, so Shema, if there's any issue with the audio, just speak up because I'm not looking at the chat window. Okay, good. So what I wanted to talk about today is what has changed in the Google search results pages, and then slides, but most of them should go pretty quickly. So here you see a typical Google search results page, a SERP, from before the change that was announced. So, you know, we're all pretty familiar with these. All of us have placed ads on AdWords, so we see lots of ads on that page, 3 at the top, up to 8 on the right-hand side. And then all of a sudden, from one day to the next, Google decides to remove the sidebar ads. Not only do they remove the sidebar ads, but the thing you cannot see on this slide is they also introduced a 4th ad at the top of the page. And this is actually an interesting point because this slide I made this week, and you see there are only 3 ads at the top of the page. So even though Google says there may be 4 ads at the top of the page, yes.
Fred, can I interrupt you? It looks like we're not seeing your slides.
Oh, here we go.
Thanks. There we go.
See my screen up? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that. I'm happy that you stopped me at the beginning of the presentation. So anyway, the first couple of slides were just pictures of me, so you didn't miss too much there. We'll have another picture of me all the way at the end. But so here's that search results page like it used to be back in January, and here's that new one as it is now. And so the point I was making was, even though Google says there may be up to 4 ads at the top of the page, that's not a guarantee. Google really tries to show ads when those ads may be relevant. And in fact, the bar of quality that Google sets is, they say the ads must be just as relevant, if not more so, than the organic results. So if Google feels like the organic result would be the absolute best answer to a question, it's likely you're not going to see ads. And just do any sort of a search where you're really looking for something you could have found on Wikipedia, chances are you're not going to see a lot of ads because those are research type queries, you know, informational. You're not looking to do any sort of commerce or any buying behavior because of it, so there's no ads on those pages. But in the cases where the query is more commercial in nature, you can see up to 4 ads at the top of the page. And then the other thing you can't see on this particular screen is you can also see ads at the bottom of the page. So even though the right-hand side ads are gone, some of those ads may have now shifted to the bottom. So you can get up to 4 ads at the top, 3 ads at the bottom, and the sidebar is reserved for product listing ads. So, you know, one of the big things I put in the email where we invited people was we're going to talk about who are the losers and who are the winners in this scenario. And the loser, most people would say, is SEO. So these are the organic results. And the reason for that is you can see here on this example search page, you can only see 1 organic result above the fold. So in this case, there's actually 4 ads that you're seeing, and the number of organic listings on the page has really dropped. So I've shown a little pie chart right there, but that pie chart shows you what percentage of above the fold results are taken by which product. So shopping ads is actually 61.5%. So in this screenshot, you can't see it, but there's a product listing ad section on the right-hand side. And we'll look at that later. You have about 30% now going to the keyword ads, and you have about 7% going to organic results. And the way that I've calculated this is simply you have 8 product listing ad results, you have 4 ad results, and you have 1 organic result. So that's how these numbers came about. Now, obviously, that's lower than in the past because in the past, with only 3 ads at the top, there was a little bit more space for those organic results. But I think organic has already for a long time been fighting the fact that more and more ads tend to go to the top of the page, and that just pushes them down. There's also the fact that the local one box, so the local results in many cases also push down the organic results. So if you do a local search, like say find me a pizza place, even if you have a great organic listing, that may not even be anywhere near the top of the page, because you're going to see some ads, then you're going to see a map with 3 or 4 local listings, and then you're going to see the organic results. So who do I think the winner is? Well, I think the winner, and this is the same screenshot now, but you're seeing the other half of it, are the product listing ads. These are also sometimes called shopping ads. And now what's important about these shopping ads is they are the only thing, in addition to knowledge boxes, which are an organic thing. But from a commercial perspective, this is the only thing now that can run on the right-hand side of the search results. Now, these types of ads, even today, before this change, were already representing 1 in 3 clicks for retailers. And that makes sense, because if you think about if users are searching for Italian shoes, well, do I want to look at some text ad, or do I like the picture of one of these shoes on the page? Do I like the price point of some of the shoes on this page? And speaking of price point, by the way, so people sometimes go into product listing ads and they start asking, well, how do I get the best position amongst these ads? And the position is often not really that important. It's the consumers are very price sensitive. So even if you have the first ad on the page, people may click on it, but they're probably going to come back and they're going to try to find a better price. So long as your price is really good, no matter what position you have in this product listing ads section, you should do okay with the listings that you've got. Okay, so product listing ads are generally considered a big winner because they're now the only thing that can show in that newly open space. Now, I would argue that the other winner is actually AdWords. And again, people say this is Sidebar Geddon, this is a huge change, this is dramatic, oh my God, what are we going to do? Well, I think this is actually not that big of a change. In fact, I would argue that this change was not a change at all. That's point number 1, and I'll go deeper on that. Number 2, Sidebar ads just had poor performance. They did not do well, so I'll show you some stats around that. Number 3, bottom ads actually perform better than ads on the right-hand side. A lot of people don't accept this, and I'll tell you a story of how that meant that this launch was actually delayed by about 5 years from when it could have first launched. And then number 4, I did some math, and I have a blog post that runs through all the numbers, and you can check that out, and I'll point you to it. But I would argue that there are actually more clicks available in the ecosystem as a result of this change. And I think that number is actually 18% more clicks are now available. Okay, so point number 1, why do I think this change is not really a change? Well, if you look at mobile search results pages, they've never had right side ads. They've always had a single column of information. And so if you had product listing ads, those would show above the organic results. And then you get your ad result. And here on that mobile screen, you can see just barely the first organic listing. So now the same thing is happening on desktop. On desktop, you have all of the ads, you barely have the first organic listing, and you have a huge chunk of the page taken by product listing ads. So in fact, all that Google's doing is they're making the desktop search results pages more similar to what's happening on mobile search results pages. And so the reason I argue this is no change at all, or in fact a good change, is that desktop searches on Google have been declining. And here you see some stats from Google itself, and you see that somewhere around 2011, desktop search was peaking, and now that's actually been declining. So if you were optimizing for the desktop experience, you were spending time and effort trying to make things better for a shrinking segment of your opportunity. Whereas if you look at the mobile segment, which is represented here in yellow, you can see that's been a growing portion. And now, in fact, as of last year, you can see that the yellow portion is bigger than the blue portion. So there's actually more people doing mobile searches than desktop searches. And so really what we as advertisers should be doing is optimizing for that mobile experience. And what that means is we have to be above the search results if we want our ads to be visible. And not only do we have to be above the search results, we probably have to be good enough to be in positions 1 or 2, because not that many ads show up on mobile devices. And so all we're being forced to do now is to think about desktop in the same vein that we think about mobile. So if we take a mobile first approach, good things will follow from that. for our desktop campaigns as well. But mobile really is the name of the game these days, so that's where we should be focused. Now, my second point was that right side ads, sidebar ads, were really not performing well. So I'm basically thinking these were the table scraps of PPC. And great, you had 8 advertisers fighting over those table scraps, but it was the 3 advertisers at the top of the page who were running away and winning the game. And let me illustrate that. So you can look for this in your own account. So just go into AdWords, look at some history, from before the change in February and after the change in February, and add the segmentation in your reports, which shows ads at the top and ads at the bottom in other positions. And so here you can see top ads in this particular campaign have a 2.3% CTR versus a 0.17% CTR for that exact same advertiser, and the ads are shown in a different position besides the top. And now these numbers are not small. I mean, we're looking at more impressions coming off of the right-hand side than on the top. Now, with more than a 10x difference, and this is a different advertiser, and you see the same thing. I mean, they had 1.31% CTR when the ad was not shown at the top, but a 15% CTR almost when the ad was shown at the top of the page. So, I mean, these are dramatic improvements. So at the end of the day, yes, maybe you could only afford to be on the right-hand side because the top was too expensive. But my argument would be, well, figure out why you can't afford to be at the top. Is your conversion rate not good enough? Are the margins that your business has not comparable to your competitors, right? There's got to be some underlying reasons why you can't afford to compete for the top 3 positions, because clearly somebody is. And now I'll be realistic. I know there are stupid advertisers out there who are new to the game and they just maybe have some vanity issues and they just want to bid for the top of the page regardless of how much it costs. And then 2 weeks later, they look at the bill and they look at the results and they realize that they've just blown a whole amount of budget. And so that, of course, doesn't make it harder for us. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's always somebody competing for these top positions. So figure out why your business couldn't be there because somebody is able to do it. And so if you look at this, I mean, 1,000% increase in CTR when you go from the right-hand side to the top, I mean, these are pretty dramatic numbers, right? So if I was going to go to my manager, I would basically say, well, listen, we got to figure out a way to be at the top because that's going to grow the business 10 times faster than if we continue to compete for these scraps on the right-hand side. Now, my third point is that these right-hand side ads, some of them have been moved to the bottom, and one of them has been moved to the top of the page. So the top of the page, obviously, we all agree that that's going to give you a better CTR. That's a very desirable position. But people might argue that the ads at the bottom are actually not going to perform as well as the ones on the right-hand side because they're below the fold, so people actually have to scroll all the way down to see them. While back in 2011, when I was still on the Google team, we ran this experiment in a couple of markets. These were mostly Asian markets. And so we started putting some ads at the bottom. And what we noticed was that the ads at the bottom actually had a better CTR on average than those same ads that they were shown on the right-hand side. So even though people had to scroll to get to these ads, they would click on them more often. Now, what are the reasons for this? One reason, and this is speculation on my part, but I think people oftentimes still don't distinguish between ads and organic results. I mean, to us, it's obvious because we work in this space, but to someone who doesn't know how to place an AdWords ad, they may not really distinguish between the fact that one thing is an ad, the other thing is not an ad, because they're text ads. They look very similar to the average user. And so if they see something that's in line of the organic results, they don't feel like they're clicking on an ad. And so some people do have an aversion to ads. They might not want to look at the right-hand side because they feel like they're being pitched to, but they have no problem looking below the search results. And so that's why you see these better CTRs there. So Google already measured that 5 years ago. Now, interesting story, but the reason that we didn't launch this in the whole world, even though we thought this was a really positive potential change, was that when we proposed it in bigger markets like the United States, we basically said, well, ads number 1 and 2 are going to show at the top of the page. Ads number 3 and 4 are going to show below the search results. And then ads number 5, 6, 7, etc. are going to show up on the right-hand side. And people just freaked out. They were like, no, you can absolutely not do that. The ads above the folds that are immediately visible, those should be the next highest positions. So 1 and 2 at the top, 3, 4, 5 on the right-hand side, and then whoever is like all the way at the bottom, those should be below the search results. But in fact, our numbers showed that these were more desirable positions. But again, the vanity thing to some degree kicked in, and the fact that some of us are agencies, we have to explain to our clients that, yeah, actually ads at the bottom of the page perform better than the ones that you can immediately see when you load up the page. For some people who are not really industry, you don't even have to be industry experts, but just deeply embedded in the industry, to them it's hard to kind of comprehend that maybe the metrics actually do prove that these are better positions. So that's another argument for why I think this is going to be a really good thing. So if you take this information, I ran some numbers and I predict there's going to be 18% more clicks. So, and you can follow this whole logic and the math on the link that's at the bottom right there. It was my last post on Search Engine Land. Basically, I think sidebar removal takes about 8 to 16% of the clicks away. But then a lot of that is recouped by moving one of the ads to the top of the page, which has more than a 10x CTR, right? So just putting one ad to the top, which has a 10x CTR, you can basically take away a whole bunch of right-hand side ads and still approximately break even. Now, if I just make the basic assumption that bottom ads are going to perform just as poorly as right-hand side ads, even then I get to 18% more clicks available in the system. Now, I know and I think that, and I'll show you actually the numbers behind this, but we know that these bottom ads are better performing, so 18% is a conservative estimate. Now, the bottom line is Google does have thresholds. So for Google to decide how many ads go to the top of the page, there's a threshold there. So they can tune these things to be somewhat neutral. Obviously, AdWords doesn't want to make changes that are hugely dramatic from one day to the next, because that's just, it's not good for anyone's business, right? I mean, if you had a certain budget set in AdWords and typically you don't spend it, and then Google makes a change, and now all of a sudden you spend 20% more than expected. Even if your budget was high enough, that's still not a pleasant experience because you weren't expecting it, right? Maybe you just expected a certain amount to be spent every day. So what I expect will happen is AdWords is tuning this to be relatively neutral in terms of how many more clicks are in the system. But over time, I think they will change those thresholds, and we're actually going to start seeing more clicks for advertisers as a result of this change. Now, Google's post about this change said, in aggregate, on average, this is neutral, or this is a good thing. Well, you know, I don't particularly care for averages or aggregates. And the example that I made was, well, in the United States, we're going through the presidential campaign right now. Whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, if any candidate gets on stage and says, you know, I'm going to raise taxes, or I'm going to lower taxes, I should say, right? Do I care about that statement that they're going to lower taxes? Probably not. I want to look a little bit deeper into that, because what they probably mean, they're going to lower the overall taxes, but there may be certain segments of people that have to pay more taxes as a result, right? So I don't care about the average. I care about my checkbook at the end of the month. That's what I want to know about it. So whenever Google makes a statement that says in aggregate, on average, this is all good, well, thanks, Google, but is it really good for me as well? Okay, and that's why I want to talk then a little bit coming up on how you can react to this if you find that the results maybe are not ideal. Now, there was an interesting study, and this is done by Merkle RKG. So you can see the blog post right there at the bottom. But to kind of substantiate what's happened as far as the CTRs for the ads that shifted from the sidebar to the bottom of the page, you can see that blue line. So before the change in early February, it's pretty flat in terms of the CTR for bottom ads. And then when they started to be shifted to the bottom, all of a sudden there's been a 60% increase in CTRs for those same ads. As the orange line, that's the ads shown at the top, and they've seen a very small decrease in CTR. And that makes sense, because instead of 3 ads to choose from, now there's 4 ads to choose from. So individually, they all have a little bit of a lower CTR. But as a system-wide total, there's actually more clicks happening for ads because there's more ads shown at the top. Okay, so how could we all respond? Now, the first way to respond, well, actually to back up for a second, the way to respond if we're not happy. So say that we're now in position 8, which means our ad is showing up on the second page of search results. By the way, very few people go to the second page of search results. Studies have shown that it's roughly 5% of people will navigate to page 2, and then it keeps dropping by half every time. So I think it's around 2% of people may go to page 3. So the numbers get very small very quickly. So really, again, if we're serious about growing our businesses and being successful with AdWords, we must be on page 1 of the search results, because that's where the lion's share of the action happens. Now, how does Google decide which ads show in what positions? It's based on ad rank. Now, ad rank used to be a simple formula, which was cost per click multiplied by click-through rate. Over time, that formula has become more complicated. So nowadays, Google says it's a factor of your maximum bid, as well as the auction time quality score factors, as well as any impact that you have from different ad formats or the different ad extensions that you're using. Okay, so lever number 1 that you have is if you need to go from position 9 to position 7 to be on page 1, you could increase your bid. Okay, that's the easy one to do. Now, Google does have a tool for this. It's called flexible bid strategies, and one of those bid strategies is bidding to a specific position on the page. So Google can help you automatically bid to the top of the page or anywhere on the first page of the search results. So if you don't want to go in on a frequent basis, but you do want to use your bid as the lever to be in those positions, go ahead, enable that strategy. Google's automatically going to take care of it for you. So it's an easy and free tool to use. Now, personally, I think we should focus on quality score. So bid is a great, easy lever for us to use, but the real thing and where we as agencies, account managers can earn our keep is not by having our customers pay us more, but by doing a better job of optimizing the accounts so that their quality score goes up, because that's the other lever that you have in terms of modifying the ad rank. So what are the things that contribute to quality score? If you want to have the whole presentation, I've given this one for Convirza in the past, so do take a look through the archives. And that video is posted there. So a little bit of an abbreviated and somewhat updated version of this is what's going to follow here for the next 10 minutes. But quality score fundamentally breaks down to click-through rate, the relevance of the ad, and the landing page experience. So let's talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. So first of all, though, if you want to understand how is your keyword rated for each of these 3 components of quality score, you can simply hover over that little speech bubble next to each keyword, and then Google shows you whether you're above, below, or average on each of these factors, and then it gives you the overall keyword level score. Now keep in mind, this keyword level score that you see, this is a representation of kind of the quality score outside of the auction dynamics. So this is kind of a guideline for you to know if your ad is kind of getting worse or getting better, but it is not necessarily the number that is used by the auction itself to determine whether your ad shows and how much you pay. Now, component number 1 of quality score, so is the expected click-through rate. And a very easy way to think about this is a keyword relevant to my business? So here you see one of our campaigns for Optimizer, and so we have some keyword tools. These keyword tools are inexpensive, but they're not free. We have a free trial, but that doesn't make the tool free. So, and actually the little icons here are wrong, but basically what we're saying here is free keyword tools. That's not a good keyword for us. So no matter how good of a job we do trying to improve the CTR on this, fundamentally it's just the wrong keyword for our business. Whereas a keyword like AdWords keyword tools, yeah, that's a much better one, because we have tools for people doing AdWords to find better keywords. There's no indication of free in this. So it's kind of like that base level. Is the keyword even relevant to your business? That's component number 1. Now, quality score is mostly a factor of CTR. So when Google looks at the click-through rate, that's really the main thing they care about. And Google has very complex systems of measuring click-through rate. So if a keyword is newly added to the system to your account, Google may still look at how other advertisers have performed for that same keyword, right? Chances are somebody else somewhere in AdWords has bought that same keyword that you're just buying before. And so Google has an expectation of what is that performance at the keyword level. Google also has an expectation of what is your account performance. So for all of the other keywords you've historically bought in the same account, have you typically been better than average, worse than average, or average? So Google factors that in. Now, as soon as you make your own ad group, and this is the relationship between the keyword and the ad, relationship number 3 here, Google starts to look at that very closely because that's really the thing that indicates the relevance, the CTR for your account. But until they have enough data between the keyword and the ad level, they're going to rely more on the account level signals, the system-wide keyword level signals, and maybe some historical signals about your domain. How has your domain typically performed? Now, as you all know, if you add a new keyword to the system, it starts out at a quality score of 6. That's another change Google made last year. So the question then is, how long does it take for Google to give you the actual quality score that you should have? If you read their help material, they say it's usually within 24 hours, but I would argue with that. It's really not a measure of time. It's more a measure of how much data you have. So what we did was an analysis of how many keywords would change from one quality score of 6 to some different level after a certain number of impressions. So we looked across the optimizer data set, and we saw that once you hit about 100 impressions for a keyword, there's much less chance that from one day to the next, you're going to change away from the quality score of 6. So in those first 100 impressions, Google's learning, and there's a pretty good chance that you're going to go from a 6 to the actual quality score that you should be. But if after 100 impressions, you're still at a 6, then 6 is probably your actual quality score number. So that's kind of a guideline that you can use to see how you're doing. The other thing to keep in mind is that when Google calculates the quality score number of 1 to 10, it is based on Google search data only, and it is only when the keyword matches exactly to the query. So simple example, if your keyword is the broad match keyword blue widgets, if somebody does a search for blue widgets, which is exactly the same as what your keyword was, then it impacts the visible quality score number, that number of 1 to 10 that you see in the account. However, if somebody types in some additional words or changes the query around, then it does not impact that number of 1 to 10 that you see in the account. But no matter what, it always impacts the real-time quality score. The real-time quality score are these auction-specific signals that Google uses to figure out the next time a query like this one happens, does that tend to perform well or not so well, right? So just keep in mind that when Google talks about CTR, they really talk about Google search CTR when the keyword matches exactly to the query. And again, I apologize here, my smiley faces are all happy. One of these is supposed to be unhappy. But component number 2 is talking about ad relevance, right? So now we've hopefully selected a keyword that's actually relevant to our business. What does the ad relevance do? Well, the ad relevance is basically just asking how good are we by using ad text at conveying the relevance of our business. So if I've now bought that keyword, AdWords keyword tools, if I have this first ad, it doesn't talk about keywords at all. So this is actually supposed to be the frowny face. This is not a good ad. This, and we've tested this in our account. This has poor ad relevance. It has below average ad relevance. Whereas if we make a simple change to the ad text and we start talking about keyword tools, and we put something in the URL about keyword tools, then it actually all of a sudden goes from below average to average. We're still working to get this above average, but it's already a pretty good thing to go from being below average to being at the average level. Okay, and then factor number 3, this is the landing page relevance, and this is basically answering the question of how happy are users with the location where they've ended up. So now again, we've picked a good keyword, we've picked the better performing ad text. The question is what's the destination page going to be? If we're talking about keyword tools, do we take people to our homepage, or do we take people to a page specifically about keyword optimizations that our tool can do? Obviously, this would be the better user experience versus this. Now, for all of your businesses, you do want to measure this, you want to keep an eye on it, and we have a script that can help with that. So we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Now, the landing page component, I believe, is actually a smaller component of the quality score system. And so there's been some recent studies that assign weights to this, and they say that landing page is about 40%, expected CTR is about 40%, and the remaining 20% is due to ad text relevance. Because historically the landing page component was mostly a punitive factor, now it can be a slightly positive factor. So when somebody comes to me and says, we have bad quality score, help me fix it, usually the landing page is not the first place I look at. So unless you have poor landing page quality across the whole account, it's usually not the biggest concern to me. And the example I want to give here is, so you have two landing pages here. You got Amazon on the left, eBay on the right. Which one of these is better? Well, to Google, honestly, it probably doesn't matter that much. They're probably very close because there's nothing dubious going on. These are two great e-commerce platforms. And so, you know, whether you put one additional ad, whether you do switch up the layout, that's not really going to have a dramatic impact on user happiness. And hence, it's also not going to have a huge impact on the ad rank and the CPC that you have to pay. Okay, so what really matters at the end of the day, though, so we've talked about these three subcomponents of quality score, but what really matters is the ad rank. And the ad rank, as Google says, is based on four things. So it's the auction time signals, then the three subcomponents of quality score that we just discussed, your bid, and the extensions and the ad format factors. So my takeaway from this would be, well, make sure I'm using all of the correct ad extensions. I'm using the newest ad formats available in my space. My bid obviously has to be somewhat competitive, and then I can do a good job towards optimizing my ad text, my landing page, but the numbers that you're going to see in your account are much more reflective of a trend. Are you headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? And then it's really the auction time signals that come in and figure out that last bit of when your ad shows. And so these auction time signals, that's what impacts the real-time quality score. And this is really sophisticated. What Google does is they say for every single search that anyone anywhere in the world does, we know a number of things. We know where that user is located. We know what kinds of searches that user has done before. We know the time of day, the day of the week for that user. We know the type of device they're using. We know the types of keywords they've just typed in. All of these things play into the rank of the various ads that can show. So basically what Google does, it's a correlation in terms of CTR. So they say, okay, for this advertiser at this day of the week, is that typically a good day for them or a bad day for them? That can skew your quality score in real time up and down. Now, some of the examples I gave you are pretty straightforward, but Google even at one point analyzed whether the lunar cycle had an impact on CTR behavior for users. And so they ran it through the system. We did an experiment, we tested it, and we found that the lunar phase did not have an impact on the CTR. But the important thing is we asked the question. So at Google, we tried to look for correlations between CTR and other things. And if we find something that has an impact on CTR, then it becomes part of the real-time auction time signals to calculate the real-time quality score, which feeds back into the ad rank. Okay, and this is sort of a slide that I like to show people, because when people talk about quality score and improving their ad rank and lowering their CPC, fundamentally, I think people have to think about CTR as the only thing that really, really matters. Okay, and so as we all know, ad rank is maximum CPC multiplied by CTR. That's actually how it used to be in Google. Now they call it different things, but at the heart of it, I'll show you why this is probably still what they do. Okay, so translate each of these things a little bit, and you see CTR is clicks over impressions, max CPC is dollars per click. Well, if you cancel out the clicks at the bottom here and the clicks at the top here, what you end up with is dollars per impression. Dollars per impression happens to be also called CPM, cost per milli. In the advertising industry, that's an important number. That's how much money you make for every page impression that you serve. Now, remember, Google's a publisher. Google wants to make money. If twice as many people search on Google as before, Google would hopefully like to make twice as much money as before. If you have a CPC-based system, there's no guarantee of that. But what Google has smartly done is, even though they tell us we're CPC advertising, by using the CTR component, they're actually guaranteeing themselves the CPM. And so basically, if Google has twice as many searches this month as last month, they're going to roughly double their revenue. Okay, so if you ever question what motivates companies like Google, well, CTR, if I was running Google, would be a very, very important factor, because that's what guarantees consistency of my revenue and growth of my revenue. So if you as an advertiser are wondering how do we make Google happy, CTR makes them happy. Okay, so how do you improve your quality score? Just a few more slides here, but if you want to know the subcomponents of quality score, you can now look in tools like Optimizer. A number of other tools have added these as well. And this is important news because this was not available a couple of months ago, but Google recently added this data so that tools like ours can actually include it in the interface. So now you can see the account quality score, but you can also see what's actually causing the biggest issues. So in this case, it's the expected CTR that's the biggest issue for this account. Here's an example from our account, so you can see these keywords are good, and we've included the 3 subcomponents, as you can see here, so you can even filter and say, show me any keyword where maybe the ad text relevance is not so good. You can also see this, but you can only see 1 keyword at a time if you go into the AdWords interface. So in a tool like ours, you can see everything on a single page. Now, how do you improve the expected CTR? Well, like I said before, choose keywords that are relevant to your business. If the keyword is really not relevant, no matter how good of a job you do, you're always going to have an uphill battle to improve the CTR. Now, sometimes Google doesn't think you're going to have great CTR, even though you've picked a good keyword. So in that case, make sure you're bidding enough to get into the auction so that you can prove the relevance, so that you can give Google enough data so that they see that, in fact, you are relevant as measured through CTR. Okay, and a great way to boost your CTR is to use ad extensions. Ad extensions have been shown to have dramatic impact on click-through rates. So go ahead and use any of these that seem applicable to your business because they can really help you. Okay, so how do you improve number 2, the ad relevance? You have to use tight ad groups where all the keywords are closely related to each other. If your ad groups get to be too big with too many keywords, then you have to write ad text that are more generic because they have to map to more keywords that may be more unrelated. And then, of course, once you have these great ad group structures, take some time to write great ads that highlight the relevance and unique offer. I know at Optimizer, we've been guilty of this. We get lazy, so we do a lot of work researching keywords, putting them into ad groups, and then we put the same ad text in every ad group and we think we're done, right? Because it takes a lot of time to write ads. But if you do a great job writing specific ads, you can actually dramatically boost your click-through rates. That's going to lead to a greater quality score, and it's going to reflect in a discounted CPC. Okay. Now, we actually published a little script, and you can take this from the bit.ly link that's right there. But what we've done is we put a Google spreadsheet together that has the keyword level quality score subcomponents. But for each of the keywords, we also tell you what's the associated ad text. So if you already run multiple ad text variations in an ad group, we'll tell you for each keyword which one is the better performing ad variant. Now you can then also do a filter and you can say, show me any of my ad texts that have below average quality score for the creative level. So you can see this column right here. So now I can do 2 things. I can say if every keyword in an ad group has below average for this component, I just have to rewrite my ad text in the existing ad group. However, if I see a mix of keywords inside of an ad group, some of them have better than average quality score, some have worse than average quality score, then I want to split it out. So I move the low performing keywords to a new ad group and I write a new ad text for them. So the beauty here is I'm keeping all of the keywords that have good quality scores in their current location. I'm not messing with those, but I'm moving all of the other ones out. And so what's nice about the script is it will tell you what's the currently best performing CTR ad for that keyword, and then you can use that as a starting point for making a new ad. So this script will help people to do an account restructure. So go ahead and give that a try. And then as far as improving the landing page experience, it's really about preserving the scent of the query. And so you oftentimes hear advice that says, well, put in a headline on the page that includes the keywords. Does Google specifically care about the headline having those keywords? No, not so much. They care about what is the experience that generates. And they care about preserving the scent of the query. So what that means is the user to the keyword search. The scent of the query is preserved when they see those keywords in the ad text. They immediately see, oh, this ad seems to be relevant to what I was looking for because it includes my keywords. Then they go to the landing page and they want to still have that query preserved on there. So they still want to feel like, oh, they took me to exactly the right place. Because remember, online, it's much easier to hit the back button and click on the next ad than it is to end up on your homepage and then have to figure out on the homepage, well, where do I go from here to find the thing that I was actually looking for? Number 2, make sure you have original and useful content. So that basically means if you're just repurposing content from somewhere else, putting a different spin on it, that's probably not going to be great. Make sure you're transparent and trustworthy, so have great terms and conditions, privacy policy, that type of stuff. Make your pages easy to navigate, and also make sure it's easy to navigate on mobile devices because that's the majority of search now. And then make sure you have reasonable load times. So load time does factor in, but it's not hugely important. It's just to make sure that you're not slower than the average website from the region that you're coming from. And then personally, we monitor bounce rate, time on site, and other signals from Google Analytics. And one thing I recommend is that you tie your Google Analytics metrics directly into your AdWords account, because now you can start to identify inside of AdWords which keywords have high bounce rates. And so that's an indication that maybe people don't feel like they came to the right page. So you can change your landing page, hopefully improve your landing page components of the quality score. So that's all I've got in terms of optimization. If you want to see the tools that we have, you can try Optimizer free for a couple of weeks, and we were pretty affordably priced. So if you haven't already, take a look at that. And there's my contact info. I'd love to take any questions that people have submitted. Shima, do we have any questions lined up?
Hey, awesome, Fred. Sorry, it looks like I was muted there. Yeah, it looks like we have a couple questions. We have someone asking how we use the script that you showed us a few slides earlier.
Yeah, so the AdWords scripts are very, very cool. These are pieces of JavaScript code that you can copy and paste directly into the AdWords account. This is under the bulk operations section. And then there's a section for AdWords scripts. All you have to do is copy and paste it. You preview the script, and then some scripts will make changes to your account. Other scripts are about generating reports. So the one that I showed you is just going to generate a report. It's not going to make changes. So it's very safe to run, but that's how these work. So if people haven't played with AdWords scripts in the past, Search Engine Land has a great 4-part series that I recommend you check out to kind of get the basic principle behind it. But one of the key benefits of these scripts is that first, you can automate things. So if you find yourself running the same report consistently, say on a weekly basis, you can actually put it on a schedule through the scripts. You can say, run this script once a week on Mondays. It automatically generates a Google spreadsheet with the report. And the other thing that makes it really powerful is you can do report manipulation. So instead of just pulling a keyword report, what I've done is I pulled a keyword report and an ad text report, and I've joined the two up through the Google spreadsheet system. So again, this is something you could have done through Excel, but you'd have to download 2 separate reports. You'd have to do the VLOOKUPs. And so even if you're good at it, it still takes you 10, 15 minutes to do this every single time. For the script, you program it once, or you take a methodology that someone like myself has created, you copy and paste it, and it just works.
Okay, we have another question, and they're asking if you suggest using single keyword ad groups.
Yeah, so SKAG, single keyword ad groups. I'm not opposed to them. I also don't think they're always necessary. So with that script that we have, it actually tells you when it's necessary to go down to the single keyword ad group level. Generally, I recommend somewhere between 5 to 25 to 30 keywords per ad group. That forces you to remain topically relevant between all the different keywords. But the script can now tell you, well, okay, here's 5 keywords that just don't seem to be doing very well with the corresponding ad text. So you can move these 5 into a new ad group. You run that same script a couple of weeks later, and now you see in the ad group of 5, there's still 1 keyword that's still not doing great. So that one moves out by itself and becomes a single keyword ad group. Now, if you want to do single keyword ad groups from the beginning, that's fine. It means that your account structure becomes more, I don't want to say complicated because it's not necessarily complicated, but it just becomes bigger. So now instead of doing ad optimization in 1 ad group, maybe you have to do it in 10 ad groups. So the scale of everything just becomes a little bit harder. Now, with tools like ours, that scale issue kind of goes away. But if you're manually managing things or doing a lot of spreadsheeting work, then it's sometimes kind of a negative. So it's kind of the balance of how much benefit do you get from it versus how much extra work do you have to go and do.
Okay, and we've got another question from Kathy. She's asking, she says there's no preset flexible strategy, and she thought advertisers had to create their own, and she wants to know how that would work.
Sorry, Kathy, so if you wouldn't mind elaborating on that question, so are you talking about the flexible bid strategies for automatically bidding to a certain position on the page? So maybe if you can elaborate on that question a little bit. While we take the next one.
Okay, while we're waiting on that, we have another one from Laura. She's asking, what an advertiser with multiple locations should do in order to appear in relevant order in the ads.
Yeah, and so I don't know if the question there is about the local box. So if you have multiple locations, just making sure that the correct location shows up in the search in the maps box. That's really the whole algorithm that Google does. There's various tricks that I've heard people do. It helps to be closer to the city center. So if people do a generic search where there's not a specific location inherent in it, Google tends to show businesses located in the more commercial parts of town first. So if you don't necessarily have that great location downtown or in the commercial core, I've heard of people using PO boxes and doing some other tricks. I don't know how well those work, but that's one thing I've heard. In terms of AdWords, you can associate your locations as location extensions, and that's also automated. So what you would basically do is you would say, hey, Google, here's my list of 10 or 20 locations, and then they will automatically pick the one that they think is the most relevant. But again, that's based on the algorithm that they serve. If you wanted to take some more control, you could do it, I suppose, by having different campaigns with different geographic targets and associate different location extensions with them. But that may be more effort than it's worth, in my opinion. Now, if you feel it's a significant issue, that would be the workaround. Set up different campaigns for very tight geographic targets and associate different location extensions to each of the campaigns.
All right, we have another question. It says, have you seen any industries that have been impacted the most by this change?
Yeah, I haven't looked industry-wide, but one sense that we're getting is kind of the impact is more on the small business. So I think the industry doesn't necessarily matter, but maybe plumbers come to mind. Plumbers, where you have a variety, you may have 10 plumbers all competing in the same area, and now that you only have 7 ad positions on the first page as opposed to 11, that means that 4 plumbers are basically losing out. A lot of these businesses also couldn't afford to pay for the top positions, so it tends to be maybe the national chains that could afford those higher positions. The smaller local ones hadn't quite figured out how to compete at that same level, so they were the ones on the right-hand side, and they may be the ones falling off of the page now. At the end of the day, and I'm sorry if it's a bit crass, but I think small businesses oftentimes don't have good representation from agencies, or they try to do things themselves, and so they don't take the system to the extent of its full capabilities. And that's why you end up in positions where you sort of fall off of that first page and you have a very hard time getting back onto it. So, but I think it's kind of eye-opening for a lot of these companies that may now have fallen off of those pages, and they really need to figure out which agency can still support us at a reasonable level. But there's also an expectation in many cases that they can get great service for very low cost, which in reality is often not true, right? I mean, you can get fast, good, or cheap. You can choose any 2 of these, but not all 3. And I think people in some industries have been looking for all 3, and they're now going to realize it's just not possible to get everything. And they're going to have to either start spending more money on it or reset their expectations about how much volume this can drive for them until they make a bigger investment into it.
All right, we have another question, and it's, do you think that the removal of the right sidebar has increased cost per clicks due to more advertisers competing for visible space? Yeah,
so the initial numbers that we're seeing is no, that's not the case. Now, again, these are aggregate numbers, average numbers. Obviously, if you happen to be in position 4 on the right-hand side, and now you're showing in the top position, you may in fact have a higher CPC, and that's just because you've now had the opportunity to jump over a threshold. So your price is not just determined by the next advertiser on the page, but it's also determined by the minimum threshold that Google has to show you above the search results. So that from one day to the next could have actually bumped your CPC. But overall, we haven't really seen the competitive landscape changing very much, and CPCs changing dramatically because of this. And again, I think it sort of comes from the fact that there are just more clicks available from these different positions because the CTRs are better. And so the CTR improvement kind of counteracts the increases in CPC that would have been necessary. So everything's remained relatively flat.
All right, and here's another one. It says, since Google Shopping does not rely on keywords, I'm having difficulty getting my ads to appear. Do you have any ideas? My competitors' ads do appear.
Yeah, and so that's a huge topic of its own. And so PLAs, product listing ads, shopping ads, they don't trigger off of keywords. They trigger off of the merchant fee that you have and whatever's in there. So that's more akin to SEO in some ways. So you have to write really good descriptions and really good titles. Nowadays, Google also enforces correct categorization. So basically, Google will map certain queries to certain products. If your product is not correctly classified in the feed, then Google may not think your product is actually a good candidate to show on that specific query. So feed optimization tends to be the main thing to work on. And then Google does have these nice benchmark CTR and benchmark CPC metrics for shopping ads. And so that will give you a flavor of whether you're just significantly underbidding your competitors, and then that could be the issue. Or if you're significantly below the CTR of your competitors, and obviously that assumes that you're showing up in the first place, but it could speak to, hey, maybe you have a really lousy CTR because your price is significantly higher than everybody else's, or maybe your product images are not optimized. But again, it then points back to, we need to go to the feed, we need to change our prices, we need to have better images. So that feed is really where it all starts. And if that person wants to follow up with me directly, I'm sure I can dig up a few good resources on that because it's a pretty big topic.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Fred. That was a good hour, and thanks everyone for your participation. Everyone watch for the recording for us, and we'll send that out in an email today or tomorrow. And then you can go to our website, convirza.com, and go to resources at the top to see this webinar. And then also, if you go to convirza.com, you'll see a big button that says Start Free Trial. You can actually do a free trial of our product before you start to pay for it, which is pretty awesome. And thanks again, Fred. We really appreciate it, and I'd recommend that you take Fred up on his offer. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, we just want to also say thank you to everyone for joining us, spending an hour with us this morning. And if anyone has any questions, more than happy to take it further on email.
All right. Well, thanks again, Fred. Thanks, everyone, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.